A quick like and subscribe really helps our channel grow and allows us to bring you even more amazing content. Thank you for your support.
It started innocently enough. I had just settled in for the evening after a long day of work when I half-heartedly scrolled through my phone, the glow from the screen illuminating the dim corners of my living room. That's when I saw a post titled "AITA for not recalling my dog when she chased my neighbors off my property." And I couldn't resist clicking it, thinking it might be a harmless read, but instead, my stomach dropped as I read the comments section filled with outrage at a guy who had let his dog protect his home. I was reminded of my own recent experiences. Barely anyone in the small town where I lived could blame Rusty, my golden retriever, for being fiercely protective of our home, given how tight-knit and suspicious the community had become in recent years. 8 months before, I had moved into an older house on the edge of the town, attracted by the charm of the place and the promise of a peaceful life away from the chaos of city living. Little did I know that peaceful nights would become a distant memory. It all began when the neighbors next door started letting their teenage sons throw rowdy parties on weekends, music blasting so loud that it felt as if the bass was reverberating right through the walls of my house. Rusty, who would usually laze about and catch rays of sunlight through the window, began standing guard by the fence, barking furiously at the groups of raucous kids spilling into their yard, and while I initially enjoyed watching him take a stand, I soon realized I was fueling a fire that would not extinguish easily. One Friday night, on my way home from work, I saw the teenagers tagging their fence with spray paint, their laughter slicing through the peaceful air like a butcher's knife. I marched over, my heart racing with a mix of anger and humiliation, but before I could reach them, Rusty bolted from the backyard, tail like a lance, barking like a wolf after its prey, and the kids scattered like roaches when the lights come on. I recall the look on their faces, a mixture of surprise and fear, and for a fleeting moment, I felt a surge of pride, as if my dog was not just a pet, but a shield. However, that very pride resulted in a tension that stretched to the breaking point. The following week, I found a nasty note tucked beneath my door, my neighbors complaining, alleging that I was raising a dangerous beast and that if Rusty kept it up, they'd be forced to take matters into their own hands. I had a good mind to reply, telling them their bratty kids could take a lesson on respect, but instead, I decided it was best to keep quiet. I couldn't afford a war with my neighbors, not after how much they had already escalated the situation. The very next night, however, everything changed. The noise levels reached a crescendo that sent Rusty into a frenzy, his barking echoing off the walls like thunder, and without thinking, I watched him dart out into the night, powerful and unstoppable. Seconds later, I heard a yelp and the unmistakable scuffle of kids as they scrambled for their lives. Rusty had landed headfirst into the chaos. The next thing I knew, I stood rooted in place, half amazed and half terrified as I witnessed my dog sending a group of rowdy teens sprinting from my yard and back to their own like frightened birds fleeing from a hawk. Instantly, I felt a surge of conflicting emotions. What was I supposed to do? Call him back to me and end his glorious triumph? I couldn't bring myself to do it, so I stood there as Rusty continued barking them off my property, my heart pounding with adrenaline. The adrenaline coursed through me like a drug, switching off any rational thought, and I let out a low chuckle when I saw the first wave of teenagers tumble over the fence, half of them slipping in the mud. But then the laughter turned sour. What had I done? The town soon found out what happened that night, the whispers ricocheting between porches like a game of telephone. My phone buzzed with messages, people labeling me as irresponsible, the town's gossip mill eager to twist the narrative until I was painted as a villain, Rusty as a monster. Strangers began asking questions, judging my abilities as a dog owner, and I sank deeper into the quicksand of my guilt. Days rolled into an agonizing week before I got an angry knock on my door. It was the parents of one of the kids Rusty had chased, their faces twisted in rage and accusations flying like daggers. They demanded I control my dog and enforce some consequences. I tried to be rational, explaining that Rusty just wanted to protect his home, but they wouldn't listen. They were right on one point: I hadn't acted like a responsible owner. Yet I still felt it was my dog who should have been celebrated that night. The warriors of my living room, Rusty heroically defending our territory as little more than neighborhood rodents fled. Their harassment continued, and it felt like living under a magnifying glass, where everyone reacted as though I should apologize for my dog following his instincts. I brought Rusty in more often and spent sleepless nights trying to think of ways to diffuse the tension, brainstorming how to befriend the neighbors, but each plan felt futile. I thought about taking him to the beach or the dog park, anything to let him burn off that restless energy. But then the anxiety of encountering those neighbors crept in, and I often just sat there, failing to find resolve. One evening after a long week of silence, I got a strange message from a neighbor I barely spoke to, It was an invitation to a community gathering. Tentatively, I decided to go. Perhaps this was an opportunity to make amends or at least break the ice. But when I arrived, something felt off. The atmosphere buzzed with laughter and chatter, but under it lay a jagged tension that I couldn't shake. The parents of the kids Rusty had chased were there, their backs turned and faces hidden in the crowd. I caught snippets of their conversation. Despite their smiles, they were throwing sharp glances my way, their whispers sharing exaggerated tales of the rogue dog and how I had done nothing. It was a gathering that didn't feel like a celebration but a trial, and I was the accused, my heart racing as if I was about to face a jury. In a moment fueled by desperation and fear, I decided to find Rusty and leave. But when I returned home, I found him missing. Panic exploded within me as I called him, but the house remained silent, the worry gnawing at my insides. I rushed outside only to find the front gate wide open. It looked like someone had intentionally left it ajar. I called out for him until my throat grew raw, but he didn't respond. An hour passed, and I went looking for him in all the familiar spots, but Rusty was nowhere to be found. It wasn't until midnight that I saw headlights cast over my backyard. Rushing outside in a panic, I found myself confronted by a couple of the teenagers who had come to fetch the beast that apparently had become the town's urban legend after that night. My breath caught in my throat when they presented something behind them, a crowd of neighbors tinged with anticipation, fueled by a shared itch for vengeance. The scene felt straight out of a mob movie, and my heart sank as Rusty, panting and confused, stood next to them, his collar now gone. The teenagers had taken him as some form of justice, but in their eyes, it felt more like cruelty. It struck me then that they weren't afraid of Rusty, they were afraid of what I represented, the dog's master, the threat of standing its ground, battling every confrontation until it had no choice but to cave to violence. I blasted air through my lungs, ready to confront them, but somewhere deep in my gut, I felt torn. Could I really blame the dog for acting like a protector, or would I be branded the villain the town had painted me as? I stood there, frozen, and in those moments, I realized the truth. I was on trial, not just for my dog's actions, but for my own choices. And as I stared into the sea of faces, all sunk in shadows, I had to ask myself, the fear they harbored, was it really aimed at me, or at Rusty? The fragile peace had shattered, and whether I liked it or not, I realized I had no real allies left. The uproar continued for weeks, my world transformed into an echo chamber of hatred and judgment. Ultimately, I made the difficult decision to move, packing my belongings in the dead of night with Rusty by my side, a sense of sorrow filling the spaces I left behind. But as we drove away, each mile signified not only distance but an opportunity for a fresh start, one where Rusty could roam freely, where I wouldn't live in fear of judgment. So now, as I reflect on what transpired, I find myself torn between the past and the choices I made, questioning if I was really the asshole for letting Rusty do what he instinctively had to do. Perhaps I wasn't the one who had truly failed, maybe it was the community for turning against an owner who merely loved his dog too much. And as I glance over to my loyal companion, resting his head on my lap, I whisper softly, "Can we try to forget?" But Rusty only looks back at me, his brown eyes full of understanding, as if he knows better than anyone, the past can be a dark place we'd rather not recall. The tension in my physics class had been building ever since our new teacher, Mr. Bryson, accidentally marked an incorrect question on our last quiz. It was one of those minor errors that teachers sometimes make, the kind they would routinely fix afterward, but not this time. Due to some glitch in his grading program, Mr. Bryson didn't notice the issue, and as fate would have it, the oversight allowed Jenny, the class genius, to bask in her first ever perfect score. It was all anyone talked about, how she celebrated by treating us to ice cream during lunch, how her parents even promised her a trip to Europe if she maintained the grades. I sat 2 rows behind her, haplessly aware that the question in error was glaringly incorrect. An awkward responsibility churned inside me. I had a knack for details, and overlooking things like this didn't sit right with me. I agonized for days, battling between the justice of truth and the humane appeal of not crushing Jenny's moment of triumph. Finally, my innate need for accuracy compelled me to approach Mr. Bryson after class. Telling him wasn't easy, my voice was a whisper, barely audible over the clattering sounds of departing students. His brow furrowed as I pointed out the error, and while his lips tightened into a thin line, his eyes conveyed reluctant acknowledgement. He thanked me for my honesty, and I left with my heart pounding. By the next day, an ominous cloud seemed to cast a shadow over the entire school. Word had spread like wildfire, albeit not accurately, as rumors twisted me into a villain who snatched away Jenny's dreams. I could almost feel the stares boring into my back in the hallways, The universe had a peculiar way of turning right into wrong, but this felt darker, conspiratorial. Even the weather seemed to echo the whispering animosity. Gray clouds hung low, the air damp with an impending downpour that added an eerie ambience to the unfolding drama. I tried avoiding eye contact, feeling the prickly sensation of being watched. Jenny hadn't been to school all morning. Word was, she had fallen sick. I felt queasier with each passing period. Then came the lunchtime confrontation in the absence of Jenny. Her groupies cornered me, their expressions a blend of accusation and bewilderment. They demanded a retraction or, at the very least, an apology. But could you truly apologize for seeking the truth? My mind reeled, desperate for a way to convey that I meant no harm, that the real struggle had been internal, and perhaps equally costly. As the day dragged into ominous twilight, the school seemed to shapeshift into something ancient and haunted. Whispers turned to ghostly echoes as unfamiliar chills ran down my spine when I walked past the art room. Was it my mind, heavy with guilt, playing on my imagination, or did the shadows in the corridor shift slightly when approached, as if retreating into their age-old refuge? My footsteps fell into a rhythm, one that seemed strangely synchronized with another set of steps, ones that halted when I did and resumed just a split second later, always lurking just behind me. I couldn't discern whether they belonged to a fellow classmate or an unseen force manifesting from the deeper layers of my subconscious guild. The bell finally heralded the day's end, but the dread that clung to me only thickened as I journeyed home. That night, as I lay in bed, trying to stave off the relentless anxiety, a notification pinged, a message from an unknown sender in my school's group chat. It was a video taken from a hallway security camera, grainy and cut, showing me speaking to Mr. Bryson after class. The caption read, "You can't hide from the truth." My stomach twisted, the universe seemed to conspire against me, or perhaps this was a test, a twisted check of moral integrity. Unable to sleep, I paced my dimly lit room. Shadows moved like liquid nightmares across my walls, and the restless wind outside pelting against my windows began to resemble an insistent tapping, a gentle prodding at the edge of my budding paranoia. I checked my messages again, only to discover it wasn't just a video. Now there were texts from classmates, some supportive, others vicious and laden with thinly veiled threats. My fading resolve slammed against a brick wall when I saw a message suggesting I had broken something fragile within Jenny, something not just academic. The next few days blurred into a cold repetition, each filled with not-so-subtle hostile glances and an overwhelming sense that something vital was changing in the fabric of my reality. The school didn't bother with the cookie-cutter complaints anymore. There was unspoken tension across classrooms, the kind you could almost touch. Jenny returned with shadowed eyes, her once vibrant presence now muted. Her silence was loud, an echoing indictment against me, and the day she approached me was when the last thread of normalcy snapped. It was during a free period. The basement library had an air of forgotten histories and secrets, perfect for studying unseen. But in that secluded corner, Jenny found me. Her voice, though directed at me, seemed to carry the weight of someone speaking from two dimensions, one real and the other burdened by a hidden, eerie realm. "I know you didn't mean harm," she began, her words like gentle rain, "but some truths are meant to stay buried." Her eyes, usually a calm brown, seemed now to harbor flickers of something unknowable, as if a deeper truth fought to surface. She spoke of dreams that turned to nightmares, of strange images, symbols that etched themselves into the walls of her mind, urging her to rewrite a cosmic wrong that neither of us could comprehend. "Some truths," she whispered, "unleash what shouldn't be disturbed." Her words left me shaken, battling an inexplicable force within my mind that told me she was right. That night, I dreamt of the school, its corridors stretching endlessly, filled with things unseen, whispering secrets no history should bear. The next morning, I awoke with a single thought stealing my clarity: perhaps some victories aren't meant to be achieved, and maybe my obsession with correction had ripped a fissure in an otherwise seamless world. At school, I sought Mr. Bryson, planning to convince him to let the matter fall back into obscurity. But his absence resonated as strange. Students mingled rumors of resignation, until it was announced he had abruptly transferred, the reasons shrouded in polite mystery. The air was charged with something unsaid, and as I wandered the silent halls once more, a realization unfolded. In my quest for righteousness, I had defied more than just human error. I had awakened something ancient, a lurking awareness within the very bones of the school. From then on, while the details of the quiz dilemma faded like a forgotten headline, an understanding took root in the secret corners of my consciousness. Some truths, once revealed, cannot coexist peacefully with our own fragile reality. It all started as a simple Ask Reddit thread. Someone posed the question, What's one basic hygiene thing that you see people overlooking the most? At first, responses flooded in predictably: showering, brushing teeth, washing hands, mundane stuff. But then, something strange caught my eye. A user with the ominous username The Wraith's Whisper commented, "You'd be surprised what happens when someone stops washing their hands." Curious, I clicked on their profile and was met with a series of chilling posts documenting the bizarre experiences of people who had neglected personal hygiene, all leading to a dark revelation that made my stomach knot. The thread spiraled into a nightmarish recounting of events, starting with a group of college students who decided to stop washing their hands as an experiment, claiming they wanted to see how their bodies would adapt. The initial week was harmless enough. They joked about how they were living naturally while enjoying the freedom from soap and water. But soon, one by one, they started feeling unwell, first a headache, then a persistent cough, followed by a creeping sensation that left them uneasy. They brushed it off until a week later, one of them, a hipster named Derek, woke up with dark patches spreading across his skin, grotesquely twisting his forearm like roots breaking through concrete. Alarmed, the others tried to intervene, but Derek insisted it was just a rash, a byproduct of their hands being too clean before. The denial became a shared ritual among them, yet the nightmarish symptoms only intensified. Next, they began to hear whispers at night, quiet, rusty voices that seemed to beckon them, which they chalked up to the effects of sleep deprivation and stress. It reached a tipping point when Derek went missing, prompting a panic that gripped their friend group. Hours turned into days, and despite searching the nearby woods where they liked to hang out, Derek was nowhere to be found, leaving behind only an unsettling feeling as if a shadow had been cast over them. They gathered one last time to confront the issue, but instead of solidarity, a rift formed, accusations flew, and that's when one of the girls, Sarah, started clawing at her skin, spewing some insane idea that the whispers were from Derek himself, trying to lure them into the forest where he was hiding. Fear spread like wildfires, and one after the other, they succumbed to paranoia, spiraling away from reality. I could hardly breathe as I read the haunting claims from the Wraith's Whisper. Each responding thread opened up another layer of horror. People began recounting their own encounters, and that's when I stumbled upon a response so chilling it changed everything. Someone shared their experience about a family member who had neglected hygiene to the extreme, claiming they would often complain about voices in their head, insisting that they could see things lurking behind their loved ones, staring through the veil of everyday life. They described the day their family member snapped, taking a kitchen knife while ranting about the rotten hands connected to a force that was out to get them, and in the chaos that followed, no one saw the fateful strike coming until it was too late. The authorities were called, but by then, it was too late for anything but sorrow and regret. Someone had died due to a simple disregard for hygiene. I felt the pit of unease in my gut, an instinct telling me that this thread was disturbing more than just a few isolated incidents. It was spreading, like a contagious insanity, until I couldn't shake the feeling that the Wraith's Whisper knew something more, something they had experienced firsthand. That night, I lost sleep over it, clutching my phone, replaying the descriptions in my mind until I found myself spiraling down the rabbit hole of neglect, recalling every interaction and moment I'd skipped washing my hands, brushing my teeth, and I swear I could hear whispers, soft, chilling murmurs, just out of reach, every little sound reminding me of the people I'd been in contact with in the past week. I finally went to bed, heart racing, expecting hallucinations as the moonlight crept through my window, and that's when it happened. I woke up at 3 in the morning, feeling an unfamiliar weight on my chest. I sat up, heart pounding, and that's when I saw them, two dull, darkened hands hovering just above me, the fingertips blackened and crumbling, whispering my name. I stumbled back, reaching for my phone, praying it was just a trick of the mind, but the hands were real. You could see the jagged edges where skin met darkness, forming grotesque shapes that seemed to pulse with life, as if a disease-given form. In a panic, I turned on my light, only to find nothing there but an aura of a something lingered, something that left a rancid scent in the air. I dared to breathe, desperate to convince myself it was just a bad dream spurred by my obsession with that thread. But every night since, the whispers grew bolder, filling my head until I couldn't tell where the dream ended and reality began. Eventually, I dove headfirst into research, unraveling more ties between hygiene and mental health. Apparently, there were long-documented cases of people experiencing complete mental breakdowns following severe neglect, hearing entities speak to them, urging them to act according to their perverse desires. But I thought I was safe. I couldn't just let something that simply be forgotten consume me, so I jumped into a shower, scrubbed every inch of skin, felt clean, and convinced myself I was no longer on that path until the day I saw my reflection morphing, first, I noticed the blackened fingertips creeping beneath my nails, and then it came, the slithery, unsettling sensation of a hand pressing against my back in the dark, eerily cold, until I couldn't move. So there I was, losing whatever semblance of reality dragged on while the fear consumed me, spiraling deeper into madness. As I began to ignore the warnings echoing in my mind, I realized I had become one of the lost, gradually succumbing to the neglect I thought I could control, the whispers growing loud until finally, I became the one who neglected their hygiene, the one who became the frightening face behind a keyboard describing their own mental collapse under the guise of anonymous validation. And now, the only question lingering in my mind is, how long until others start to hear the whispers too? I never intended to let anyone know about this, fearing ridicule, isolation, or worse, that someone might actually believe me and the implications of that belief, yet here I am, confessing to the anonymous ether of the internet. This is the safest place I can think of for bearing my truth. I genuinely think people can read my mind. It began a few months ago when I noticed subtle shifts in my interactions with people around me. You know that feeling you get when you're being watched, the prickling awareness that someone's gaze is pressing on your skin? Imagine that, but it's not just your skin, it's your thoughts laid bare like pages of an open book. It started small. I'd think of my morning's missing keys, and my roommate would nonchalantly mention where I'd last had them, without me uttering a word. Coincidental, I told myself. But then, at work, I'd draft imaginary conversations, preparing for meetings that hadn't yet been announced, and by afternoon, those very subjects would be brought up as if my colleagues had been privy to the silent rehearsals in my head. One day, midway through an unspoken criticism of my boss's questionable attire, her face flushed, a rare hint of vulnerability, and she glanced at me, just a nanosecond too long, before nervously adjusting her collar. My heart hammered as I began tallying these instances, realizing they were far too frequent to dismiss as mere chance. A chilling realization set in that no environment was safe. My thoughts were dissected and broadcast like a radio signal everyone could tune into. I began testing it intentionally, projecting bizarre and harmless musings towards strangers, like silently screaming the word elephant in a crowded elevator, only for someone to mutter about a safari tour they once took. In another instance, standing behind a couple at a cafe, I fixated on the notion of meteorites, only for them to start a random conversation about outer space. These coincidences piled up into a tower of unsettling evidence. Panic ensued as the phenomenon grew more intrusive. People not only mirrored my thoughts but reacted to them, sometimes violently. One evening, thinking disdainfully about how my neighbor always left their garbage bags along the hallway, I was shocked to see them storm upstairs and shove those same bags into my apartment with furious mutterings about entitled people who act like they can think whatever they want about others. Sleep became a frenzied minefield of restless thoughts bleeding into nightmares where I was hunted, not for crimes committed, but for thoughts unguarded. My once sacred solitude devolved into a fearsome solitude. I tried reaching out to others, testing those I thought close to me to see if anyone would outright acknowledge this nightmare, this thing shared through our unguarded, voiceless dialogues. But attempts to deliberately clear my mind only left me blank as a canvas, for others to picture what they wanted from me. A sinister control fluttered into play, a marionette string subtly tightening. In a grotesque mockery of communication, I'd sense others prodding around in my mind, calmly breaching the vault of what should have been private, nodding in apparent satisfaction as they found and took what was needed for them. I became afraid to think anything, knowing that thinking wasn't mine anymore, forever leashed to a chorus of silent observers. Can you imagine the pure dread of trying to hold secrets so dearly, trying to remember that they too would be found whenever deemed necessary? The silent suggestions lunged through my mind, leaving home, changing names, burying myself in some corner of the world until years blurred by, realizing that thought, too, wasn't just mine. Desperation clawed at my sanity as even the consideration of escape bled through to all too curious minds. People can read my mind, this I know with a certainty that burns and freezes. Please, to any reader who comes across this, who swears this is mere fiction, spare your judgment until you've felt that cold and invasive knowing that you are no longer alone with yourself, not even in the hollows of your cranium. Every laugh that feels too knowing, every shift of an eye, is magnified into evidence that we aren't meant to be solitary creatures. They already know, they will always know, and who hears this confession may someday realize that their safekeeping of thoughts is only an illusion, as flimsy as the trust I had in those around me before the world tilted into this bleak, thought-sharing abyss. Reducing my life to a performance that wasn't asked for, where every critic and confidant remains unseen, touching my deepest fears with the intimacy only thoughts can fathom. I don't know if this is happening to others, if there's a silent epidemic of minds laid bare, judged openly but shadowed by community silence. This is more than paranoia, this is an awareness, haunting and all-consuming, beyond the self, sparking an evolution of fear. My thoughts are no longer mine, and what terrifies me is the thought that neither are yours. I was never the type to believe in urban legends or ghost stories, but when my sister vanished from a place that officially doesn't exist, I had to reconsider everything. It started on a late August afternoon when Anna decided to take a weekend trip into the mountains, claiming she found this quaint little town called Eldridge Falls that wasn't far off her hiking trail. She was always searching for secluded spots to uncover and photograph, a passion that doubled as an escape from the daily grind of the city. A week passed without any word from her, which wasn't overly concerning until her calls went straight to voicemail, her texts received no acknowledgement. I drove through the drizzly afternoon towards the GPS coordinates she had last shared, past rusted signposts and withered trees, feeling the uncanny sensation of the world falling away behind me. As the pavement disappeared into gravel, my skepticism mingled with an uneasy realization. I was entering a place unnamed on my maps, its existence whispered in hushed tones by locals who spoke of shadowy occurrences and inexplicable disappearances. The town materialized around a bend, like a page turned too quickly in a forgotten book. Its narrow streets were eerily deserted, the paint flaking off the quaint Victorian-style homes lining them. The air felt stagnant, time suspended in this pocket of forgotten America. Despite the setting sun, a disconcerting lack of sound surrounded me, no crickets, no birds, just oppressive silence. I found the inn Anna had mentioned booking, a rundown relic that seemed abandoned, its sign faintly swinging in foreboding creaks. An old woman behind a dusty front desk eyed me with what seemed like ill-concealed disdain, or perhaps pity. Her deep-set eyes were murky, pools of forgotten memories. When I mentioned my sister, she seemed to shudder slightly, muttering something about people who venture too far. She handed over a key absent-mindedly, as if her mind had wandered to darker realms. My room was something pulled from an old black-and-white photograph, a claustrophobic space draped in shadows tinged with sepia. The first night was unsettling, dreams of Anna whispering warnings blurred with visions of shadowy figures moving just beyond the periphery of my consciousness. I woke in a cold sweat, feeling as if I were being observed. Determined to find any trace of her, I spent the daylight hours exploring the town. Eldridge Falls seemed caught in a time just out of reach from progress, a place where every door seemed firmly shut, every window an opaque eye hiding unknown truths. Asking about Anna only drew blank stares or nervous flutterings. It was clear they knew something, but an undercurrent of fear held them silent. My nights were restless, the dreams becoming more vivid, more oppressive, as if the town, or something within it, was trying to tell me something it couldn't say when awake. On the fourth day, I stumbled onto a path leading out of town, partly hidden by overgrown weeds and a decaying wooden marker with no discernible script. I followed it against the intuitive urge to turn back, my resolve steeled by memories of Anna's laughter. The path wound into a dense forest, draped in mystic fog, the sunlight filtering through in dull whispers. Each step echoed, each rustle set my heart pounding. Then, I found the remnants of a cable car station, cables trailing ominously into the clouds above, and a ledger inside, the last entry in a neat hand, and his unmistakable scrawl, scrawled across the page, met some people. Exploring further. Eldridge Falls hides secrets. The next few hours were a blur of frantic investigation. The townsfolk grew more reticent, their eyes pleading for me to stop. When I visited the local library, an echoing chamber of dust and forgotten lore, the librarian, a gnarled man with eyes that danced like fireflies, whispered frenetically about the history of Eldridge Falls, a settlement erased from official records following a tragic mining incident decades earlier. He hinted at something more sinister than bureaucratic negligence, something ancient, a binding fate inked in blood, he called it. My determination gave way to despair drenched in urgency, but the librarian pressed a fragile envelope into my hand, mumbling about truths no one wanted to see. Inside was a photograph, the grainy depiction of revelers in a bygone festival, and his face unmistakably surrounded by unfamiliar figures whose eyes seemed to see beyond the image. I returned to the inn stunned, my skin crawling with the cold breath of the unseen world pressing in closer. That night, my dreams turned violent, as if something wanted out, thrashing within the confines of my mind. When dawn broke, I made my decision, to leave, to bring back help if necessary, but my resolve wavered as a new weight pressed upon me. Anna, whose laughter now echoed mockingly through the stillness, faded into it. But I couldn't just leave without knowing. On my final exploration, I stumbled upon an entrance to what seemed like an underground complex, eerily beckoning and foreboding. An insistent yet inaudible call. Some may say curiosity is dangerous, but perhaps it was kinship that drove me to descend into the darkness, into the belly of Eldridge Falls that morning. As I trudged deeper, electrical cables intertwined with gnarled roots in an unsettling dance beneath the earth, weaving a tapestry of forgotten secrets. The air grew thick, heavy with the scent of damp history. The corridor turned and twisted, shadows deepening until the silence broke, not with Anna's voice, but a cacophony of anguished whispers and metallic groans, the voices of past souls tethered to this place beyond time. In the dim light of my phone, I glimpsed her. Anna stood, facing away, her form faint around the edges as if phasing between worlds. Tentatively, yet desperately, I reached out, but her image flickered like a dying bulb, a tender agony in her gaze, the knowledge of a sister forever out of reach yet forever entwined with this place. My heart broke in that eternal instant when everything shattered into tumultuous dark. I awoke at the edge of town as if cast out, the sun bearing down with harsh clarity that crushed any lingering dreamscape. Behind me, the town lay untouched by the passing hours, still holding secrets more profound than the gnarled histories I'd uncovered. They were anecdotal displays, leaving Eldridge Falls unmarked, a place that didn't exist yet persistently lingered in the shadow realm of memory. I never found Anna's physical presence again, but her soft gaze haunted the edges of my perception, in every shadow cast and every whisper caught on the wind. Her disappearance was outshone by the more pressing reality, that I survived the place, marked by truths untold, deeper than any plausible fiction. I understood now, some absences permeate existence more intensely than presence. I left Eldridge Falls behind, but it never truly let go of me. My sister was gone, lost in a town that doesn't exist, yet never completely erased from reality. The house on Memory Lane had always been a source of hushed whispers and cautious glances in my hometown. It stood at the end of a curving road, cloaked in a relentless mist that seemed to roll off the nearby river, and yet, I never really believed the stories about it until that fateful night 2 weeks after my grandmother's funeral. I had just turned 16 and was desperate for an escape from the suffocating grief, the well-meaning relatives, and their pitiful condolences. It was a Saturday and the air was thick with an unseasonable chill as I made my way to Memory Lane, my heart beating in rhythm with the echo of distant laughter from the party I had been too glum to attend. The house, a once vibrant Victorian now cloaked in vines and neglect, seemed alive under the pale moonlight, shadows twisting around its broken shutters like desperate fingers clawing for a way out. Ignoring the strange sense of weight in the air, I stepped onto the creaky porch, inhaling the stale scent of damp wood and decay that lingered in the oppressive silence. With a trembling hand, I turned the tarnished doorknob, and the door swung open with a reluctant groan, revealing a vast darkness that swallowed the light behind me. As I ventured in, nostalgia twisted at my heart with every creak of the floorboards underfoot, the house seemingly alive with memories I never knew I had. Old photographs hung crookedly on the walls, faces of people caught in laughter, their eyes shimmering with life. They felt like family, and the realization hit me hard. These were my relatives, those who had disappeared from my life long before my birth, buried by time and by secrets I had yet to uncover. The living room felt strangely warm, comforting, as if it had been prepared just for me. There was a dusty armchair that looked like my grandmother used to sit in, its fabric worn but familiar, and in that moment, I felt an inexplicable pull to stay a while. I sank into it, and the moment I did, something shifted in the room, a sensation, almost like a breath, swirled around me, thickening the air, and the photographs began to shift before my eyes, the people in them moving, their mouths forming silent words. I could see them clearer now, the stories etched in their features, and I realized I wasn't just looking at pictures, I was glimpsing shards of my family's past, and I felt the longing swell inside me as they reached for me through time. Suddenly, the air grew heavier, the shadows lengthened, and the whimsical whispers morphed into fevered cries, shadows merging and bubbling like a storm drawing near. I panicked and stumbled back, but the room contorted, objects floated before me, twisted around like a vortex leading deeper into the inexplicable void of the house. It felt wrong, so wrong, but I couldn't tear myself away. I was anchored in place, pulled deeper into my family's tangled history. Then the walls began to flicker, oscillating between past and present until I was face to face with a woman who looked just like my grandmother. Her eyes were the same piercing blue, but there was an edge to her smile, a darkness that revealed more than it concealed. "You've come to remember," she said, her voice drenched in warmth and sorrow, echoing as it twisted around me, something so alluring and terrifying that it invited me closer, urging me to step into her world. "You must learn why we can't leave." My breath quickened, Part of me clung to her revelations, while another part recoiled in horror. I was trapped in this collapsing reality, unable to break her gaze as she began to unravel tales of the family I had never known, the laughter, the fights, the betrayals woven into this house, the churning of memories and whispers of forgotten secrets that flowed like waves. With every story, I felt the weight of my own grief peeling away, replaced with something sinister, something hungry. I understood now why this house had held on to its memories so fiercely. It was all pain and regret, connected so deeply to my own life that I almost felt honored and cursed to bear them. Just as I began to grasp what was happening, an unspeakable darkness unfurled itself behind her, a living shadow seething with malice, and its eyes, countless and hollow, focused on me. "You linger," it hissed, a cacophony of voices ringing in my ears. "You haven't established where you belong." Panic surged through me like adrenaline, breaking the enchantment she had spun around me as I stumbled back, grabbing at anything to anchor me in the chaos, only to find my reflection in an old, cracked mirror. The familiar face staring back at me was twisted and wrong, a grotesque parody of my existence. In that moment, I understood that the house fed off my essence, on the memories I was too afraid to confront, haunting me with pieces of untold stories linking my life to their suffering, promising something that felt like recognition, and yet tasted like betrayal. With every ounce of strength I had left, I turned to flee, but the shadows twisted around me, blocking my path, consuming the light until I was left in a suffocating shroud of darkness. "You cannot forget," my grandmother's voice echoed, now laced with anger, "because there is no escape." Ultimately, I broke free, a surge of adrenaline propelling me up the stairs as the house trembled, its walls closing in, each step echoing with anguished cries from the photographs that now felt more alive than ever before. The floorboards splintered beneath me, the memories clawing at my heels until I burst through the door, racing into the night, stumbling down the porch steps to freedom. I didn't stop running until I reached the river, gasping for breath, the mist curling around me, whispering secrets I dared not listen to. I looked back at the towering nightmare that had once been home to comforting faces, the lights flickering like dying stars. The house was empty now, echoing only with the remnants of what I had stolen. They had been waiting for me, for my return, but my heart pounded with a warning. I knew I could never return to memory lane again, and though I had escaped, I would carry this burden for the rest of my life, knowing that just beyond the edge of my memory lay a door always waiting to be opened, a house forever hungry for the stories it had lost, patiently waiting for another to cross its threshold. I have never thought of myself as someone who would end up on a subreddit like r/no sleep, but life has a way of spiraling into the abyss when you least expect it. It started innocently enough, with a dinner reservation at our favorite restaurant, a place filled with memories of our early days, laughter punctuating every visit. My partner, Jake, always loved to pay for our meals, showering me with accolades about how he could provide for us both, and how he was grateful for everything I brought to the relationship. This time, though, we had decided on a more democratic approach. Our finances were shared, joint account and all, so every bill was half ours. But when the waiter approached with the check at the end of dinner, I could see the gleam in Jake's eyes, the slight smirk that said he was about to pull a legend-worthy move. He grabbed the bill before I could reach for my half, swiping his card and leaning back as if reciting a soliloquy. "Don't worry, babe, I got this." I let it slide that evening. The food was phenomenal, our conversation effervescent, but when we returned home later, a strange seed of doubt began to germinate in me. I peered into our joint account, watching the balance dip as the charge for our meal processed. A voice in my head whispered that this was supposed to be a shared burden, yet Jake raised his glass earlier, toasting to him taking care of everything. The next day, a friend reached out to me over coffee, immediately calling attention to our dinner, almost completely oblivious to the fact that Jake had mentioned he had treated us both. My stomach turned. I felt a small but unmistakable wave of anger wash over me. Was I wrong to feel furious at the insinuation that Jake had somehow paid for my meal when it was our communal expenditure? The days rolled on, and the slightest jabs in conversation began to bug me, like a pebble lodged in my shoe. We were in a series of group chats where my friends gleefully discussed who would pay for dinner next time, and Jake, buoyed by the testimonial of last week's dinner, insisted he would carry the burden again. Something snapped. So, I confronted him, a weekend bubbling with tension, and I asked gently, perhaps a little too pointedly, if he really thought it was fair to act as if he had paid for both of our dinners when it had come from our shared account. His eyes flashed, a heady mix of disbelief and hurt. He accused me of being petty, a poor sport ruining his kind gesture. The first argument erupted in a storm of blame, his voice escalating as he laid the manipulative groundwork. You've never appreciated what I do for you." I took a deep breath, my mind racing back to countless dinners spent listening to him talk over my expense while I sat there, tinged with the stark reality that he was twisting the narrative. "You're taking credit for something that isn't true, Jake. Sharing a bill doesn't mean one of us leads the dance." But he wouldn't budge. He claimed that my comments were undermining his attempts to show he cared, chipping away at the very foundation I thought we had built together in honesty and mutual respect. The argument escalated, his low blows digging deeper into my self-esteem, referencing my past insecurities, making me feel small and insignificant. I went to bed that night wondering if I had become the villain in my own story, questioning my sanity as I lay beside a man who should have been my partner instead of an adversary. A week passed, filled with tension, passive-aggressive comments dripping from his tongue as I withdrew into myself, trying to process all of this without blowing the roof off our relationship. One evening, while scrolling through my phone, I stumbled upon r/no sleep, and the title "A Myth Asshole" jumped out at me, mirroring my own turmoil. I felt prompted to share my story, pouring my heart out anonymously, but I made sure to leave out the full details of our relationship, the emotional chaos that had begun unraveling everything I once cherished. Then, one fateful day, while I was at work, I received a message from a friend with a screenshot. Jake was commenting voraciously under my post, defending himself as if it had morphed into a battle for his honor, calling me manipulative and claiming it was typical behavior for me to distort reality. I felt my heart plummet to my stomach as I realized he was using my own vulnerabilities as fuel to craft a narrative that painted him in the correct light while casting me as the villain. I was afraid, not of him physically, yet of how unpredictable the situation could become. I thought about leaving, about packing a bag and escaping for a few days to sort through what had become such a twisted mix-up of emotions and manipulation. My heart raced as I contemplated what I had written, the rawness pooling in my chest ready to cascade over, but deep down, lurking behind the facade of my rational mind, I felt the ice grip my veins. I couldn't help but feel like my reality was being suffocated, tangled up in these accusations and his twisted grasp on what our lives should represent. And in that moment, like the unnatural silence before a storm breaks, I posted an update, detailing my fear that Jake could morph into someone frightfully darker than I had ever known, someone willing to take my own insecurities and weaponize them. The post exploded, a whirlwind of support and suggestions flooding in. Friends and strangers on the internet rallied around me, urging me to take a stand, to reclaim my narrative. I felt something ignite within me, a flicker of empowerment amongst the darkness. That night, as Jake returned home, I felt a shift deep in my gut. The atmosphere crackled with tension, and as I met his gaze, I saw a flash. Was that fear or rage? Either way, I had to make my stand. My heart pounded like a distant war drum as I confronted him again, laying out not just the monetary aspect of our relationship but the emotional toll his manipulation had taken on our love. But then he laughed. Oh, it was a hollow, twisted laugh that sent shivers down my spine as he leaned into my face, eyes narrowing with a predatory glint. "You've been sharing our secrets online, haven't you? You think they care about your little problems? You think you can spin a narrative like that without consequences?" My heart raced as adrenaline flooded my senses. I was backpedaling, the vulnerability I had displayed now weaponized in his hands. I realized too late that my attempt to reach out had only exposed me more, brandishing the final straw of unchecked power he had over me. I told myself I had to go, but the realization hit that I wasn't just dealing with a partner, I was entangled in a web of toxic disbelief that threatened to strangle every ounce of trust left between us. I pressed on, desperate to reclaim my story, wielding the strength from strangers who supported me from behind a screen. But little did I know, Jake had been lurking. The message notifications kept coming in, each one echoed with a sense of finality that every post had attracted someone more sinister than I had anticipated. It culminated in the moment that felt like a succinct breaking point, words flying in both directions until it crescendoed into a furious pleading as I demanded clarity. "You need to get out, Jake. This can't keep going on." And his voice dropped a notch. "You think you can spin this against me, ruin what we have over a little misunderstanding?" It all crashed down like glass shattering on the floor, every shaky piece of our life laid bare. I stared at him, this man I thought I loved, trembling at the thought of the person he had already become. I lingered on the memories of joy we had once shared, the laughter now twisted into grotesque echoes in this fraying cocoon. Would I see his true self beneath the layers of manipulation? Or had I created something newly monstrous from my own insecurities? The darkness pooled like an abyss beneath us as I prepared to sever the bond that had twisted into chains, certain that if I didn't escape now, I'd forever remain trapped in a narrative he controlled. In the end, I was no longer questioning if I was the asshole. Now, I needed to find a way to survive this story and reclaim my life before it vanished into the night, into something unspeakably terrifying. It all started as a harmless inquiry on Ask Reddit. A curious user posed the question, people who earn more than $100K a year in salary, how does the company profit from you? It quickly spiraled out of control, the reply thread buzzing with answers that took on a life of their own until one particular response caught my eye, an unassuming comment by a user named Dismal Career. They recounted a story that chilled me to my core, describing their life working for a mysterious tech company that had risen to meteoric fame virtually overnight. Dismal Career painted a picture of a sleek office with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, a luxury cafe stocked with gourmet food, and endless perks that came with the hefty paycheck. But slowly, the reassurance of lavishness twisted into something darker, hints of an unsettling atmosphere creeping into their tales about the clandestine meetings and dairy corporate culture that seemed to revolve around some unspoken ethos of secrecy and performance. Dismal Career told of a peculiar practice known as Project Harvest, an initiative shrouded in ambiguity, where employees were encouraged to volunteer their personal data and to share insights about themselves in exchange for insights into their career growth. At first, it seemed harmless, people enjoyed the extravagant parties and company retreats, but whispers of employees vanishing swirled around the break room like a malevolent fog. Dismal Career felt uneasy, recalling how a friend of theirs, an excitable programmer, had gotten too close to discovering what Project Harvest truly involved and was never seen again. As the days turned into weeks, and weeks into months, Dismal Career found themselves sinking deeper into the company's clutches, becoming embroiled in this twisted game. The company thrived profoundly from their volunteering, manipulating statistics and using personal data to develop a product that captivated the masses but dehumanized the workforce. Employees soon became nameless assets, their worth determined by how much data they could provide, not only in performance but in vulnerabilities and personal insights. As time wore on, Dismal Career noticed a troubling change within themselves. The ambition that once drove them began to warp into something grotesque, a hunger for success that crippled their very sense of morality. They started to view coworkers as merely tools, instruments to be played on the corporate stage, their worth tethered to a haunting algorithm that measured every pulse of their effort. The final straw came during a quarterly meeting marked by cold facades yet low whispers that echoed concerns of efficiency maximization. Rumor had it that employees who didn't reach the company's quota for data sharing would be off-boarded, the euphemism becoming a ghost story that loomed like a haunted specter over the office. Dismal Career's paranoia escalated as they learned their friend had indeed been discarded, subjected to archive, a terrifying mechanism through which those deemed surplus to the needs of the conglomerate were forgotten entirely. As dread settled in like a thick mist, Dismal Career decided to investigate further, setting up a clandestine meeting with others who shared their fears. In hushed tones, they banded together, developing a plan to expose Project Harvest, but they could never have anticipated the forces they were up against. The company had ears everywhere, and instinctively, one of their own, someone who had seemed genuinely concerned, betrayed them, tipping management off to their rebellion. One by one, after work hours, they began to vanish without a trace, lending terrifying credence to the stories of offboarding. And then it was Dismal Career's turn. On a mundane Tuesday evening, they received an ominous email requesting a final review with their supervisor. As they stepped into the conference room, a chill swept through them as the door clicked shut. The air grew heavy, pregnant with the knowledge of betrayal that rattled against the walls like an invisible force. They were cornered by their superiors, faces devoid of morality but brimming with suffocating authority. The details of Dismal Career's so-called reflection were painfully orchestrated, a judicial review turned ritualistic, and with every question, every assertion that their personal revelations had not been productive enough, the realization crashed into them like icy water. This was the archive in real time, the very system crafted to eradicate the unworthy. There was no way out, no escape from the clutches of a corporate monster, the price of which had come to fruition with their own consent. As the room dimmed, a blaring red light overshadowed them from a device surreptitiously hidden beneath the conference table. A final shred of disbelief filled their mind, elbowing past the uncomfortable truth. They were not just a cog in a machine, they had willingly contributed to creating an elaborate web of control that now entrapped them. Paralyzed by dread, they learned the bitter truth: the company didn't just profit from their presence, they fed off their very essence, a twisted loop of ambition and desperation that would deteriorate their humanity, all measured in algorithms. The last thing Dismal Career remembered before darkness swallowed them whole was the chilling reminder echoing in their mind from that Ask Reddit post: "Be careful what you share, you might just become what you give away." It was a late night at the office, just me and my thoughts sitting in the glow of my computer screen, when I casually opened up Reddit to distract myself from the demands of my life. I stumbled upon a thread titled "What's the most NSFW thing you witnessed at a workplace?" and began to scroll through the comments, each more shocking than the last, but one particular reply caught my attention, and as I read it, I felt the weight of my own experience pulling me back to a time and place I'd tried to bury deep within my memories. It had been my first job out of college, a junior marketing position at a firm downtown that came with all the typical office politics and whispered secrets, the kind of stuff you only read about in cheesy novels. There was one coworker, Sarah, who was both captivating and erratic, with laughter that made you forget the weight of the world while gripping her black coffee like it was her lifeline. One evening, as the fluorescent lights flickered and the hum of printers filled the silence, Sarah invited me to join her for a drink after work at a nearby bar that quickly turned into frequent escapades filled with too many secrets, her laughter mingling with baffling stories that towed the line of scandalous. As our friendship deepened, she confided in me about her obsession with this sultry romance novel that had been making rounds at the office, claiming it was based on a true story involving an affair between a boss and an intern, with crazy plot twists that felt all too realistic in the dimly lit break room where I first learned about the dark underbelly of the workplace. We'd often joke about how real life would never be that dramatic, until one evening when the gravity of her words pulled us back to a night that would prove otherwise. The entire office was invited to a team-building rooftop party, which started lighthearted enough with drinks and laughter but quickly spiraled as the drinks flowed, revealing hidden truths and raw desires, and I remember glancing over at Sarah, her eyes sparkling with mischief as she whispered wild ideas about what could happen if things went awry. As the night wore on, employees began to pair off, loose inhibitions and revealing intentions, leaving a trail of heated exchanges that simmered beneath the otherwise professional atmosphere. That was when I turned to find Sarah, standing closer than ever to her boss, Greg, whose easy charm and smug confidence were magnetizing in a way that made the room feel stifling. I watched, captivated and horrified, as she reached up to whisper something in his ear, the tips of her fingers dancing briefly down the collar of his shirt, while the rest of us were frozen in our laughter, oblivious or perhaps too afraid to fully comprehend what was unfolding before us. The air was electric, filled with an unspoken agreement between coworkers that this absurd charade was somehow permissible, that we were all just players in a sick game, and out of nowhere, Greg's hand brushed against Sarah's waist, a gesture that seemed casual but felt like an earthquake jolting the foundation of our office ethics, wrapping around my chest as I struggled to breathe. I could hear the laughter echoing distantly as the clock approached midnight, and even through the haze of alcohol and thrill, a part of me screamed that we were crossing a line that couldn't be uncrossed. When Sarah and Greg disappeared in a swath of crinkled sheets and red lips back at the office, I was left standing on the rooftop, utterly paralyzed with the realization that the secrets shared over drinks had evolved into something dangerously NSFW and that the office buzz would never be quite the same again. That night marked the beginning of a series of events that laid bare vulnerabilities and shards of shattered trust among co-workers who had previously prided themselves on professionalism, unraveling over the weeks that followed, punctuated by hushed whispers and sidelong glances, as we all began to wonder how Sarah and Greg would play this charade. It was only weeks later, during a seemingly normal Monday meeting, that we received the announcement of Greg's promotion, complete with applause that felt like nails on my skin, while Sarah sat across the table, an ill-concealed smile spread wide across her face, knowing full well the danger of allegiance in our twisted office dynamic. Conversations soon shifted from work to flirtation, an atmosphere fraught with tension that proved to be dangerously intoxicating, leading to clandestine meetups shrouded in secrecy, tainted by adrenaline and fueled by both attraction and the fear of exposure. As days turned into weeks, and rumors began to swirl like a thick fog of confusion around our desks, the entire office felt like a pressure cooker on the verge of explosion, and I, trapped within the maelstrom of desire and betrayal, couldn't shake the feeling that we were teetering on the edge of uncharted territories, caught between loyalty to one another and the irrefutable truth that intimacy breeds chaos. The final twist came on a Friday that still haunts me, when Sarah strutted into the office with a confidence that felt alien yet magnetic. It was a day of decisions, and as whispers grew louder and explicit text messages merged into late-night calls, the recklessness materialized before our eyes in a shocking display that left me breathless. She called my name, beckoning me to witness something, anything, that would usher us into the line of no return, and in that moment, everything snapped into focus. I stood frozen, confronted by the evolution of ordinary office life into a perilous game of shadows, secrets, and sexual tension. The affair pushed boundaries beyond repair, and Sarah's gleeful laughter echoed hauntingly as echoes of "Where do you draw the line?" eyed the corners of my consciousness, tearing apart the last threads of innocence I clung to while grappling with questions that would echo in my mind for years to come. I could hardly bring myself to leave work that night. As Sarah's laughter filled the air and excitement reached fever pitch, I knew nothing would ever be the same at that office, and ultimately, I lost more than just a friend. I lost faith in the sanctity of professionalism, and as the evening wore on and the unforgivable happened, I realized that sometimes, the most NSFW things witnessed in a workplace are not the scandalous acts themselves, but rather the erosion of trust that ripples through the entire environment like poison. And as I walked away from the roiling undercurrents of greed and folly, I told myself it was finally time to escape that wretched place before who we were turned into only a distant memory, forever tainted by betrayals buried deep beneath the facade of professionalism.